In the dark winter of 1941, as the Atlantic convulsed with the wreckage of burning tankers and the black silhouettes of German U-boats prowled the shipping lanes, the world stood on the brink of logistical collapse. Britain, starved of supplies and struggling to sustain its island defenses, watched in desperation as merchant ships were sent to the bottom faster than new ones could be built. Each loss was not just a ship, it was food, fuel, ammunition, and hope sinking beneath the waves. The Allies had men, weapons, and willpower. What they lacked was time. It was at that precise moment that a man who had never built a ship in his life decided he could build one faster than anyone else in history. His name was Henry J. Kaiser, and he would transform the very idea of industrial production, proving that in total war, speed was not the enemy of quality. It was in the dark winter of 1941, as the Atlantic convulsed with the wreckage of burning tankers and the weapon of victory. The crisis at sea. By early 1942, the Battle of the Atlantic had become a slaughterhouse. German submarines, operating in coordinated wolf packs, were sinking Allied tonnage at an unsustainable rate, nearly 800,000 tons in a single month. Tankers burned offshore in plain sight of the American coast. Cargo ships carrying grain, steel, and munitions vanished without a trace. The Atlantic had become a graveyard of iron and oil. Britain's war economy, dependent on the steady flow of imported goods, was on the verge of collapse. Even with the Lend-Lease Act in full swing, it made no difference if the goods never reached British ports. The United States had entered the war with industrial potential unmatched by any power in history, but it was trapped behind a single bottleneck: shipbuilding. The country needed vessels, and it needed them yesterday. Traditional shipyards could not meet the pace. Each new freighter took nearly a year to complete. The math was simple and terrifying. If production could not exceed destruction, the war was lost. The man who saw time differently. Enter Henry John Kaiser, an unlikely savior. A self-made industrialist with a background in paving roads, building dams, and managing massive construction projects, Kaiser had never worked in shipbuilding before. But where others saw obstacles, he saw inefficiency. In his world, nothing was impossible, only unorganized. Before the war, Kaiser had helped construct monumental projects like the Hoover Dam and Grand Coulee Dam, feats of engineering that required coordination, logistics, and relentless pace. He understood that human organization could be just as powerful as machinery itself. When the U.S. Maritime Commission issued a desperate call for emergency shipbuilding, Kaiser didn't hesitate. He proposed a revolutionary idea. He would build ships the same way Detroit built cars, on an assembly line. His shipyards would be vast industrial cities, operating day and night, where thousands of workers could assemble sections simultaneously and join them together like pieces of a machine. No longer would ships be handcrafted by artisans working plank by plank. They would be mass-produced, with precision, speed, and scale. The skeptics were unanimous. Shipbuilding, they argued, could never be industrialized. It was an art, not a process. Kaiser ignored them. "We have to learn to think in terms of quantity," he said. "When you can't ship enough steel to Britain, you might as well be sending bullets to the bottom of the sea." The birth of the Liberty Ship. The vessel chosen for this bold experiment was called the Liberty Ship, a simple, sturdy cargo ship based on a British design known as the Ocean Class. It was not glamorous, and it was never meant to be. With its blunt bow, boxy hull, and triple expansion steam engine, it looked more like a floating warehouse than a marvel of engineering. But its simplicity was its strength. Each Liberty Ship was 441 feet long, could carry 10,000 tons of cargo, and cost about $2 million to build. Its top speed barely reached 11 knots. Yet what it lacked in elegance, it made up for in purpose. The Liberty Ship was the mule of the Allied fleet, a workhorse designed to endure, not impress. Kaiser saw in the Liberty Ship the perfect platform for his experiment. The Maritime Commission had set a target: one ship every 240 days. Kaiser promised to cut that number in half. Then in half again. His rivals laughed. But Kaiser was already assembling the future. The Revolution at Richmond. The transformation began on the shores of California, in a small town near San Francisco Bay. Within months, Kaiser had turned a patch of empty land into the Richmond shipyards, a sprawling complex of cranes, welders, and steel frameworks that looked more like a futuristic city than a dock. He recruited workers from everywhere: farmers, clerks, housewives, and students. Thousands of men and women poured into Richmond from across America. Many had never seen the ocean before. Most had never touched a welding torch. But Kaiser didn't care about pedigree, he cared about potential. He built training schools to teach welding in days, not months. He set up childcare centers, cafeterias, and medical clinics to keep his workforce stable and healthy. To ensure that no time was lost to illness, he introduced something unheard of in industrial America: prepaid healthcare. That modest experiment would later evolve into the Kaiser Permanente health system, a peacetime legacy born from wartime necessity. The assembly line model redefined shipbuilding. Instead of constructing a vessel from keel to mast in a single dock, Kaiser divided the process into modules. Prefabricated sections were built separately: hull plates, deck houses, engine rooms, and then brought together like components of a giant puzzle. The use of welding instead of riveting further accelerated the process, reducing labor time and weight while improving strength. In the shipyards, sparks filled the night sky. The sound of hammers gave way to the hiss of torches. Workers called the spectacle the dawn of steel daylight, breaking the boundaries of time. At first, Kaiser's predictions seemed impossible. But the numbers began to defy logic. What had once taken 240 days soon dropped to 150. Then to 100. By mid-1943, his shipyards were producing a new Liberty ship every 5 days. In the peak months, Richmond alone could launch a ship every 72 hours. The most dramatic demonstration came with the construction of the SS Robert E. Peary, a challenge designed to prove just how far Kaiser's system could go. From the laying of the keel to the launch, the Peary took just 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. Newspapers around the world proclaimed it a miracle. But Kaiser dismissed the praise. "We're not competing against time for sport," he said. "We're competing against the enemy." The spectacle was more than a publicity stunt, it was a symbol. A declaration that the industrial machine of the United States could adapt faster than any military threat. Germany's shipyards, bound by tradition and bombing raids, could not dream of such speed. Japan's industrial base was already strained beyond capacity. The Liberty ship had turned shipbuilding into a mathematical equation, and Kaiser had solved it. The human element. Behind every Liberty ship stood an army of anonymous workers. At the height of production, Kaiser's shipyards employed over 90,000 people, including tens of thousands of women. They were called Wendy the Welders, the female counterparts to Rosie the Riveters, and they became icons of the home front. For many women, this was their first job outside the home. For others, it was a chance to directly contribute to the war effort. They welded steel plates, operated cranes, inspected hulls, and learned to read blueprints. Their efficiency and precision shattered every stereotype. African American workers, too, found opportunity in Kaiser's open hiring policies. Despite the segregation that plagued much of the country, Kaiser's shipyards became one of the most integrated industrial workplaces in America. Men and women of every background worked side by side, united by the same mission: to build faster, better, and stronger. The sense of purpose was electrifying. Workers often volunteered for double shifts, fueled by the knowledge that each completed ship could mean survival for soldiers overseas. Every rivet carried meaning. Every launch ceremony was an act of defiance against tyranny. Kaiser understood morale as much as mechanics. He organized celebrations for every ship launched, complete with brass bands, speeches, and flags. The ceremonies reminded everyone that their labor had a face, a name, a purpose. "We're not just building ships," Kaiser told his workers. "We're building victory." The global impact. As the Liberty ships began to sail, their presence changed the very rhythm of war. They carried tanks to North Africa, food to Britain, ammunition to the Pacific, and oil to the front lines of every Allied campaign. The convoy system, once overwhelmed, began to recover. German U-boats found their targets replaced faster than they could sink them. By 1943, the tide of the Atlantic battle was turning, not because the submarines had disappeared, but because the Allies had rendered their strategy obsolete. The math had flipped. Each Liberty ship represented not just tonnage but resilience. For every ship lost, 2 more took its place. Logistics, once the Achilles heel of Allied warfare, became its unstoppable strength. Even Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who had once feared the collapse of Britain's maritime lifeline, marveled at the transformation. "The empires of the future," he said, "are the empires of the mind." He could have been describing Kaiser's vision, an empire built not on conquest, but on coordination. The concept of modular construction had existed in theory before the war, but nowhere had it been executed on such a monumental scale. Kaiser's yards turned it into a living symphony of coordination. Giant prefabricated sections, hulls, decks, and engine rooms, were built in parallel, then rushed by rail or crane to the ways. Instead of building ships plank by plank, his crews assembled them like enormous metal puzzles. Welding replaced riveting, a shift that horrified traditionalists yet slashed weeks from the timetable. Everywhere one looked, sparks burst like fireworks. Women in overalls, many of them housewives only months earlier, stood shoulder to shoulder with men who had once been clerks, teachers, and farmhands. They were called Kaiser's welders, and they carried a pride that defied exhaustion. At the Richmond yards alone, more than 90,000 people toiled around the clock, divided into 3 relentless shifts. A single whistle never slept. Behind that triumph lay a deeper philosophy. Kaiser believed morale was as vital as machinery. He built child care centers near the yards, introduced medical clinics, and offered hot meals for pennies. His vision of welfare capitalism wasn't altruism alone. He understood that a cared-for worker was a productive one. Those same clinics would later evolve into the Kaiser Permanente health system, a lasting legacy of wartime compassion turned peacetime institution. Yet even miracles face friction. The Liberty ships themselves were pragmatic, not perfect. Designed for quick construction, they were slow and boxy, sometimes derided as ugly ducklings. Crews joked that they were built by the mile and cut off by the yard. Early versions suffered brittle fractures in cold seas, several even snapped in half without warning. Naval architects scrambled to identify the metallurgical culprit, hydrogen embrittlement in the welds, and quickly improved steel composition and design. The lessons learned would ripple into every ship that followed. Meanwhile, the logistical machine they served kept expanding. Each Liberty ship carried nearly 10,000 tons of cargo, tanks, fuel, food, or munitions, across U-boat-infested waters. When one was sunk, another took its place within weeks. German submariners lamented that for every vessel they destroyed, America launched 2 more. The Battle of the Atlantic, once a desperate struggle, slowly tilted toward Allied favor not through strategy alone, but through industrial arithmetic. As the convoy system matured, the sight of Liberty ships stretching from horizon to horizon became a moving image of abundance. British dockworkers in Liverpool and Glasgow marveled at the endless stream of American-made hulls. Even Winston Churchill, a man of prose and precision, confessed that the production of ships in the United States has been a decisive factor in our victory. Kaiser, however, was not content to rest on Liberty's laurels. He pushed into the next frontier, the larger, faster Victory ships, and into aircraft manufacturing, dam building, and later, post-war housing. To him, limits were mere invitations to innovate. He once told a reporter, "If your problem is big enough, you can't afford to think small." By 1943, his empire of shipyards had transformed the western seaboard. Richmond, Portland, and Vancouver pulsed with activity. Entire towns sprang up almost overnight. Where empty marshes had been, now stood vast networks of cranes, foundries, and rail lines. The glow of molten steel lit the night sky like a second sunrise. At the heart of it all, the Liberty ship remained the unpretentious workhorse of victory. It was neither elegant nor glamorous, but it was indispensable. Its simplicity was its strength. Each carried the imprint of ordinary Americans who believed their hands could alter the course of a global war. As 1944 unfolded, the war that had once seemed endless began to bend toward conclusion. Allied forces surged across Europe, sustained by an unbroken chain of supply that stretched from American factories to the front lines of France. Every crate of ammunition, every barrel of oil, every loaf of bread carried the invisible signature of Henry J. Kaiser's shipyards. By the time the last Liberty ship slid down the ways, the numbers were staggering: 2,710 vessels built in just over 4 years. Never before in human history had a nation produced so much floating steel in so little time. The output dwarfed that of every Axis power combined. To the world, it looked like industrial sorcery. To Kaiser, it was merely what happened when you trusted people and refused to accept the word impossible. The Liberty fleet became a moving emblem of democracy's muscle. Their gray hulls ferried armies and hope across oceans. They carried Lend-Lease supplies to Russia through Arctic ice, food to North Africa, locomotives to India, and even entire factories in pieces to rebuild war-torn allies. They were the arteries of the free world, and the heart that pumped their lifeblood beat in the foundries of Richmond and Portland. But when peace finally arrived in 1945, the question loomed: what next? America's war machine had to pivot from destruction to reconstruction. Millions of workers were returning home, and the very industrial capacity that had saved civilization now risked standing idle. Kaiser saw this not as a crisis, but as opportunity reborn. He redirected his energies toward housing and healthcare, foreseeing the social challenges of post-war America before Washington did. His shipyard clinics evolved into Kaiser Permanente, a model of preventive medicine that would shape the future of healthcare. The same efficiency that had built ships in weeks now organized communities in peacetime. The Liberty ships themselves found new lives. Some carried refugees, others became merchant vessels or floating warehouses. A few still sail today, lovingly restored by volunteers who see in their steel plates the heartbeat of a generation. The SS Jeremiah O'Brien and SS John W. Brown steamed proudly under their own power, living testaments to human ingenuity under pressure. When the O'Brien crossed the Atlantic in 1994 to commemorate D-Day's 50th anniversary, her deck was lined with veterans who had once crossed under fire in ships just like her. Their eyes filled with memories, and the steady thrum of her engines seemed to echo every rivet ever welded in Kaiser's yards. Kaiser himself did not fade into obscurity. He expanded into aluminum, cement, and automobiles, though not every venture succeeded. Yet his spirit of optimism never dimmed. To him, progress was the only true legacy worth leaving. He often said, "Problems are only opportunities in work clothes," a phrase that captured both his humor and his boundless drive. In the larger narrative of World War II, names like Eisenhower, Roosevelt, and Churchill dominate. Yet behind every general's victory stood the silent armies of laborers and engineers who made the impossible possible. Henry Kaiser was their architect, a civilian commander who fought with blueprints instead of bullets. The story of the Liberty ship revolution is not merely industrial, it is deeply human. It is the story of welders who learned overnight what had once taken years to master, of women who balanced infants and blowtorches, of men who worked through fatigue and fear because they believed their effort mattered. It is the story of a nation that transformed itself through sheer will. And perhaps most profoundly, it is a reminder of what speed and purpose can achieve when aligned with moral urgency. The Liberty ships were never intended to last forever. Their average lifespan was 5 years. Yet the idea they embodied, the fusion of mass production and moral determination, has endured far longer. Every emergency bridge, every rapid disaster response, every moonshot engineering project since has borrowed something from the Kaiser playbook. Today, when one stands at the preserved Richmond shipyard, the air carries a faint echo of that industrial symphony. The dry docks are quiet, the cranes rusted, but if you listen closely, you can almost hear the whistle's cry, the clang of hammers, and the laughter of shift workers streaming home at dawn. Each Liberty ship launched was a declaration, not of dominance, but of faith. Faith that freedom could be built, plated, and welded into existence. Faith that ordinary people, given purpose and trust, could outbuild tyranny. Faith that even in war's darkest hour, creation could triumph over destruction. Henry J. Kaiser did not set out to be a hero of war. He set out to build what was needed, faster than anyone thought possible. Yet in doing so, he built more than ships, he built confidence. He proved that democracy, when mobilized, could be the most efficient force on earth. In the end, the Liberty ship was not beautiful, but beauty is not always the goal. It was honest, functional, and fast. It was the physical manifestation of American resolve. As the historian Arthur Herman once observed, if the B-17 Flying Fortress won the air war, the Liberty ship won the sea. When the last of these ships finally rusts away, the spirit that launched them will remain, etched in the memory of a generation that refused to surrender to despair. Because the true miracle of the Liberty ship was not its steel, nor its speed, but the idea it represented, that when humanity unites around a shared purpose, time itself can be conquered.